Hi, everybody. This is very exciting for me. It's wonderful to be here today and to be sharing with you the framework that I have created for our neuro-affirming zone from foundations to reflections. And I'm excited to take you through what I have created and what I think is a process that we go through consistently when we are delivering neurodiversity affirming therapy. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people on the land of which I am on and pay my respects to past, present, and emerging Indigenous people and Torres Strait Islanders across the country. Before we get super stuck into the framework, I suppose I should give you a little bit of an insight into me and why you should listen to me. So, my name is Di Vandervolt. I am a neurodiversity affirming practice mentor, and I have been a speech pathologist for nearly 20 years, which is quite scary. I've opened Perth Hills Speech Pathology over 8 years ago, and about 3 years ago rebranded it to Perth Hills Allied Health, where we expanded from speech pathology into art therapy services as well. And a couple of years ago, I also expanded into our adult learning zones, where we provide webinars and supports networks for parents, for therapists, and for teachers. Some of you have been attendees of some of the webinars, and I have been so fortunate to have such a wonderful range of presenters who have come along and joined me in presenting on various topics, all under the lens of neurodiversity affirming therapy. I guess, I've been working in the space of neurodiversity affirming therapy my whole career without realizing that's what I was doing. When I started my private practice 8 years ago, one of the big things that I noticed very quickly was that I really disliked sitting at a table and doing checking a box and making sure that so and so could say the word 100 times, 150 times in a certain way. And I found that the second I moved our therapy sessions from the table to outside to play-based to enjoying what the child is interested in and working with what they loved, we started seeing progress and we started having a totally different connection in our therapy sessions as well. At that point in time, there was no such thing as the neurodiversity affirming movement, and there was no such terminology to put to what I was trying to do. In all honesty, I was still using outdated systems. I was still using methods such as a first and then chart to be able to get through the undesirable activity to move to the desirable activity. And only through a process of reflection have I got to realize that those types of systems, those types of approaches in my therapy might have actually been in somewhat harmful to my clients. And if you're anything like me, you have absolutely no intention whatsoever of ever doing any harm to anybody. You have come into this profession, whether it's speech pathology, OT, psychology, art therapy, any kind of allied health profession. It doesn't matter where you've come from, what discipline you are, you've come into this because your ultimate goal is to help people, help kids, help adults, help families. Your ultimate goal is to help people. And therefore, anything that we might have done in the past that could have potentially caused harm also brings with it a whole bunch of really icky feelings, some guilt, some distaste. And I know that I've had to sit with really uncomfortable feelings and really go, oh, wow, okay, somewhere along the line that has definitely happened. And now I need to work through that. And once I know better, I can do better. If I sit staying in the guilt, then there's a really high chance that I'm going to just revert back because I don't really want to move on. But I also had to really work out how I was going to move on. How was I going to get from that guilty feeling to being able to actually move on and have a really good session without those harmful techniques that I was using? So that is basically, well, I didn't realize at the time that I was doing this process, this framework that I'm going to show you. But in hindsight, I realized that this is what I was doing all the time. So let me show you what this framework looks like. Let me share my screen first of all. Okay, so there we go. There's my pretty face. um, Okay, so here is the framework. And the big thing that you will see in very much in the middle of this framework is the infinity sign. Now, I know that that sign is often synonymous with neurodiversity affirming anything, which is kind of why I chose it. But it's actually really critical in this framework. When we go through this framework, you're going to see that even though we've got very particular sections of the framework, we still have to move through all of the processes all of the time. So as an overview, you can see that we've got four main areas. We've got our foundations, we've got transformations, connections, and reflections. So let's go through each section, and they're not in any specific order because we wiggle our way through them. Sometimes we're going to do them in this order, sometimes we're going to do them in that order. It doesn't really matter. The order is not the important part. It's going through all of the processes that is the important part. So let's get started. I suppose it is probably a good place to start is with foundations. So when we're looking at the foundations of neurodiversity affirming therapy, the first thing we've got to think about is our terminology. So learning what the core principles are, learning the language of neurodiversity affirming therapy is absolutely critical in taking the first step to feeling confident in how you approach it. So it's things like when we're talking about a person who has a diagnosis of any description, we would say that they are neurodivergent, so with a T at the end. When we're talking about a population of people, we call that neurodiverse. So neurodivergent relates to one person. Neurodiverse relates to any people. That means brains, different brains. So that means brains that have diagnoses or not diagnoses. That's anybody. Our population is neurodiverse, just by pure definition. When we're talking about a group of people who have diagnoses, we might say that that's a group of neurodivergence. Okay, so some terminology there. When we're talking about people who have an autism diagnosis, for example, we actually need to check with the individuals what they prefer. But at this moment in time, the general rule of thumb is to say that they're an autistic person and that we don't use the acronym ASD when we're describing somebody like that. We don't. And that is because that part of disorder that comes into it is often assigned to the medical model of requirement to fix. So disorder usually means there's something wrong. And when we're talking about neuro-affirming therapy, we're not talking about fixing anything. We're not saying that there's anything wrong with somebody. We're saying that there's a different way of thinking. That's the very first aspect of the foundations. And with that, we also, in terms of that medical model and the deficit-based approaches that we've probably been taught and used a lot, we have to shift to a strengths-based model. And we have to look at Instead of so and so can't do X, Y, and Z in the report, we might be saying so and so can do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that takes a really big shift, especially when we're looking at maybe a standardized assessment that we've done, where we typically report on what else has happened. We typically report on the standardized scores. And in that sense, when we're trying to get somebody to see the severity of something, we report on how badly they did in the assessment. Okay, so we've got to shift that around, and now we've got to start identifying the things that they were able to do in there, and then we. It's not to say that those people don't have challenges. They do have challenges, but how we report on it and how we write about it is really important in the whole process. When we are talking about neurodiversity affirming therapy approaches, and we're talking about strengths-based language, it's really important that we realize that it doesn't mean we're leaving out the things that they find tricky, because what that would be is toxic positivity. And we're not here for toxic positivity. And when M. Hammond did a webinar for us recently, she spoke about going away from the concept that somebody who's got a diagnosis of autism or ADHD has got a superpower, because I think that takes it to another extreme on another side. If a person identifies for themselves a particular superpower that they have, then they absolutely can use that to describe themselves. But we must not assign that language to that person. I hope that makes sense. So in terms of the framework, when we're looking at foundations, we're learning about the core principles. We're learning about the language that we use in neurodiversity affirming therapy. Okay, moving on to the next part. And I've gone to connections. And I think that this, again, it can go in any order, but often I find that connection leads to the rest of the framework. It's about building relationships through play, through engagement, through interaction. Now, you might be doing therapy with a teenager, or you might be doing therapy with adults. And so the word play there might go, oh no, but I'm not working with kids, so it's not play. Well, I'm talking about whatever play or whatever thing brings enjoyment to that person. So it might be play through video games, or it might be play through Sudokus or word searches, or it might be play through doing arts and crafts. It doesn't matter what it is, it's the thing that brings that person enjoyment. And the key here is that we're not using that as a tool to get them to do something that they dislike. We're using that to join in and have fun with the thing that they are doing, because that builds connection. So following a child's lead or a person's lead, I might even update this slide to say person instead of just child, because that could very well be the case, builds the trust. And until we have trust, we actually can't do the hard things. So how long does that take? It can take it. You can develop trust in as little as 5 minutes. And at the same time, trust can take years. There is no time frame on it. There is no standard way of achieving that goal. There is no prerequisite for how you go about it. What you need to do is consistently tap into what is the child, what is the person, the teenager, the adult, what are they enjoying and what are they finding fun? And then let's do that together. Even if it means that that's the only goal that you have for 18 months is connection, building rapport, building trust. Because I can guarantee you that no other goal in your therapy world will be achieved if you do not have this first. Full stop. So using play using sensory preferences, noting their interests helps to foster that learning. And we also have to revisit this on a session by session basis. It can't just be that, oh, look, we've got a really good relationship. I'm guaranteed that I've got trust, and therefore we can move on to tricky things. No, the whole point is that we've created a safe and supportive space. And then every session, we need to create the safe and supportive space first before we can do whatever might be tricky for the client. And that leads to meaningful interactions, and it leads to being able to explore and expand maybe on a person's window of tolerance, expand on the comfort level that they have in that moment. Don't forget, though, neurodiversity comes with fluctuations. Humanity comes with fluctuations, fluctuations in emotional states, fluctuations in arousal states, hunger states, all of the different ways that a person might feel fluctuates. So one thing works one week, it might not work the next week, but that's because there's all sorts of other things that have happened for that person just before that session started, or even a month before, but it's a memory, and memories are just as significant as the actual event. So that's connections. Okay, moving on to transformations. Oh yeah, transformations, then reflections. I just suddenly had a thought about that. So with transformations, this section, in fact, all of these sections is really about you, the therapist. And then what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to take this framework and look at how you can apply it to your clients as well. So the transformation here is where you take the time to think about shifting your therapy practices to be both affirming and evidence-based practice at the same time. So sometimes that takes a bit of creativity and thinking outside the square to look at adapting therapy programs that you already use to look at how we can actually honor neurodivergent communication or neurodivergent play skills, neurodivergent ways of thinking. You can absolutely balance evidence-based programs and practices with affirming approaches. There are potentially some evidence-based programs that might not fit so well with neurodiversity affirming practices. That's when we come into reflection later on, when we talk about reflections, is sometimes it's really important for us to reflect on, is this program adaptable to our neurodivergent clients? Or is it actually just one that we need to put back on the shelf and consider another option that might be better suited to our neurodivergent clients? And that's part of reflection. And that's really challenging, especially if we've been taught that's a really good program to use, or we've spent a lot of money on the program, or we don't know what else to do. Those are all things that make it really challenging for us to have a deep think about whether that's actually a neurodivergent affirming practice. And we do need to challenge the traditional methods and strategies that we've used in the past and have a look at how we can embrace flexible strategies. So, for example, in this one, this is what I was talking about earlier, where traditional practices and method for me, that was I was taught to use a first then approach. So first do this undesirable activity that you don't want to do, and then you get your reward of doing the thing that you do want to do. And over time, I've come to realize, not more importantly, reflect on the fact that what I was doing to my poor clients was making the desirable thing now come undesirable, because now I don't want to do either of them, because that just makes me think of that horrible task that I didn't want to do. So that wasn't the best way to go about it. So again, coming back to reflection, on reflection, I thought, oh, okay, I've got to change up that traditional method and use a more flexible strategy. So my flexible strategy that I use now is to create a list of tasks that we're going to do. I put all of the items down. So for example, we might have 4 different activities that we might want to do. I write each one on a piece of laminated card, and the client then puts them in the order that they would prefer to do them in. So I'm still achieving the tasks that we set out to do. Sometimes that doesn't work. And then I've got to go, you know what? This isn't working for us today. So let's just chuck it out and let's go and play Lego. Or let's go and run up and down the corridor, or whatever regulation activity the child wants to do. I work with children, so that's why I'm going to keep probably reverting back to children. So I've had to take that traditional method and turn it into a flexible strategy that can really honor the neurodivergent brain that I'm dealing with at that moment in time, in the state that brain is at that moment in time. I hope that makes sense. Moving to reflections. So this is a critical part of providing neurodiversity affirming therapy, because we have to evaluate progress, we have to evaluate impact, and we have to evaluate growth in therapy. If we aren't achieving growth in therapy, we've got to look at why. We've got to think, what is going on? And is there something that I'm doing that is having a positive impact, or is there something having a negative impact on my client? And we, at uni, we're taught to reflect, but sometimes I think that we need to really look at reflecting more on the impact that it's having on the client, not just the outcomes of the goal. So we also need to look at measuring progress beyond compliance. We need to be looking at joy. We need to be looking at confidence. We need to be looking at other factors that measure growth rather than compliance and being able to do the job, do the task. With this, I find it super important to collaborate with families as well, because it's not just about what's happening in the clinic room. It's not just about what's happening in that one session. It's about how this impact is being felt across the whole life of this person. And we need to continuously adapt to meeting the child, the person's evolving needs, because hopefully we are seeing some sort of progress or growth or change. Sometimes something happens external to our sessions that leads to a change that is not what we would consider a growth. It might be a sideways change. We have to make sure that we reflect on that and therefore change and to adapt our way of working to better suit the child where they're at then. And so this is a constant process of reflection. Okay, so reflection is critical. All of it is critical. As I said at the beginning, this is a process of going through each of these stages every single session. We need to be looking at our language, our terminology. How are we doing strengths-based, interest-based therapy? How are we connecting with our client? How are we connecting with our family? How are we transforming? How are we transforming the way that we work? And how reflecting on what impact did that have? And sometimes it's worth, sometimes we go back to, I've got to go back to that first then strategy, because I think it's a very commonly used strategy. And I reflect back to, well, what impact did using that strategy have on my clients? Now, I can say that, sure, I do feel guilty about the fact that I've used a strategy that may have caused some desirable activities to not be so desirable anymore. But more to the point, I can't change the past, but I can learn from that time, and I can reflect on, well, what impact did that have on my client? And do I want to have that impact again? Probably not. So I need to make a change. And we can do that. And I'm using just the example of the first then approach, but you can do that across any of the traditional methods that you might have used in the past. So we want to reflect on it. And then guess what? We're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to do it all again. But also, it doesn't have to be done in this specific order. It can be done in any of the orders. It can be done as a circle, as long as these processes are happening all the time. So that's the overall framework there. And what we're going to do in our neuro-affirming zone is I'm going to go through each of these sections in more detail in webinars that are specifically catering to each of these areas. And we're going to have the Q&A time in the neuro-affirming zone where you can come to me with the question or with the situation, and as a group, we will discuss how we can reflect on it and how we can transform and work towards building a connection and looking even at the terminology, the foundations of it all. So every question that we have will likely go through this framework because that's the important part. Whoops. And what the really big important thing for me is that in the Neuro-Affirming Zone, it is an opportunity for you to ask questions in a judgment-free space. I do not want you to ever feel like you are being judged for how you've done something in the past because of how you were taught and how we did things, because I've done it too. I also don't want you to feel like you are judged for using maybe the wrong spelling of something. I've had a situation where I posted an advert for a webinar where I used the word neurodivergence instead of neurodivergent. And I had multiple people comment and message me saying that I was wrong and I had done it the wrong way. I know what that felt like, and I am not prepared to have that happen in our group. This is a judgment-free space. This is a safe space because we need to be able to be vulnerable, to share the things that worry us the most in order for us to get through that and to grow together. So that is the community that we're going to be creating within the Neuro-Affirming Zone. When I send you through these slides, you will have this part as well, this handout, so that you can take yourself through this process and print it off as many times as you need so that you can take yourself through this process. Go through with a particular client, what do I need to think about in terms of the foundations? What do I need to think about in terms of the language that I use? And what do I need to think about in terms of how can I build those connections with them? What are the transformations that I need to make? And what are the reflections that I can have right now? And then do a session and then go, oh, what are the reflections on that session? What impact did that have? And so you can go through this and you can print it off as many times and use it. Actually, what I might do, I haven't put it as a PDF. I'll make it a PDF so that you can very easily access it and print it off or use it on your device or whatever. And that is the end of my little presentation. So I just wanted to check if anybody has any questions. You can feel free to just ask your question or to type it into the chat. Oh, and also I will pop up the link to the Neuro-Affirming Zone so that you guys can get that and come along to the Neuro-Affirming Zone and get a taster of what it's like to just feel supported in all that we're doing.
Sorry, I have computer has switched to a different language. I'll have to rephrase. Sorry.
Oh dear.
I tried to eliminate that. Okay, I'm writing. Shh.
Okay. You keep writing and I will post the link in here. And for anybody who's catching up on the recording, I will put the link to the Neuro-Affirming Zone in the notes of the course so you can grab it there. There you go. I will also pop the slides into the course portal. I'll just download them and thanks, Michelle. Michelle's saying that was very helpful. Good to be reminded about starting with strengths. Absolutely. Strengths is really, really critical. The other thing I will mention, this is not actually listed on the website when you're learning about the Neuro-Affirming Zone, but something that is in the pipeline. I am busy working on a ChatGPT bot that will help you, and I'll give you, if you're in the Neuro-Affirming Zone, you'll get the link to the bot where what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to put into the bot something that you've written, and you can get the bot to help you make it neuro-affirming. So in that, it'll use strengths-based language and it'll use affirming ways of writing so that we can all be working towards our written work being neuro-affirming. The other thing that we can do with it is we can put in our ideas in terms of these are the kind of things that I want to be working on for this client. Can you turn these into neuro-affirming goals? Or it might be something like, oh, the other thing that I'm working on with my bot is to create a communication profile. So we have specific questions that you can ask families, and then you plug those answers into the bot, and the bot will help you develop a communication profile for a client. So that's quite specifically a speechy thing, but I'm working towards other aspects in terms of sensory processing and things like that. And that's something that will be available inside the Neuro-Affirming Zone very, very soon. So yeah, thank you, Sally. Thank you for coming. And Michelle saying we get lots of references to superpowers from OTs in particular. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. There are lots of references to superpowers, and I think it's all very well meaning. It is because we have for so long had this deficit approach to disability and a deficit approach to any sort of diagnoses. And now we think, oh no, we don't want to have that. So therefore, we're going to talk about superpowers instead. And that is absolutely one of the reasons why it's kind of the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction. So it is well-meaning as to why the superpower terminology is there. And like you say, Michelle, there's a program, the Superflex program, that really brings in that. And again, with all of these programs that they're out there, we need to be reflecting on them. We need to be thinking critically about, well, yes, this program has an evidence base behind it, but let's be clear on, is it actually truly neuro-affirming? Yeah, that is definitely a consideration. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming along today and for joining me in this webinar. I very much look forward to working with you all in the future. And if you do have any other questions or any thoughts that you would like, please do email me, diana@perthhillsalliedhealth.com.au, or visit our website, perthhillsalliedhealth.com.au, and all of the information is on there. I've dropped the link to the Neuro-Affirming Zone below, and I will make sure that there's a link access on the course portal. And if you've got any questions, just get in touch. Oh, also on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, anywhere you want to ask a question, jump on, ask a question. I'm open to all of it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.